Hello, I'm your host, Linda Kasonde. I'm a lawyer who spent several years as an advocate for human rights, justice, and the rule of law in my native country, Zambia. This podcast was born out of the need to share women's experiences of leadership and to advocate for more women to take up leadership positions, based on themes in my memoir, Women, Resilience, and the Will to Lead. We cover topics ranging from motherhood to running for office, ambition, and managing the imposter syndrome. I hope you enjoy it. Welcome to another episode of Women, Resilience, and the Will to Lead. We're now on season 2, and we're privileged to have a guest that has a wealth of experience in international finance and is none other than Dolika Banda. So, Dolika, you are the first woman chairperson of Standard Chartered Bank. You have a wealth of experience in international banking and in development finance. But who are you behind all those titles and accolades?
Wow, Linda. Behind all of that is, you've answered your own question. It's rhetorical. It is Dolika.
Mm-hmm.
It is Dolika Banda. I am named after my maternal grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a name I don't carry lightly.
Mm-hmm.
She was our matriarch in the family. And so it is a privilege to be called that name.
Mm-hmm.
And in my family, they call me Anya Banda, which means, it doesn't mean Miss Banda in the English light way. It means you carry the name of Banda. So it's part and parcel of the status that you hold. So the Dolika that goes everywhere, the Dolika that is speaking to you now, the Dolika that is sitting on the board of Standard Chartered Bank, fundamentally she is a girl who carries the name of her Ngoni grandmother, straight from the Eastern Province, and carries the title of Nyabanda from my father's side, also straight from the Eastern Province. So a very proud Ngoni Zambian woman.
I love that. I love that. So, still on the subject of behind the scenes, Dolika, could you tell us a little more about your upbringing? Where were you born? Where did you live? Tell us about your family. Yeah.
So, born in Ndola, lived largely in Lusaka. Went to school. My first primary school was my first primary school was Mukandawire, it's called, in Libala, stage 2. And then from there, I was brought to Northmead Primary in Northmead. And around the age of 10, I was shunted off to boarding school in England for my sins, is what I always say.
Well, we are equally sinful and bearing the sins of our fathers.
Indeed.
So tell us how your upbringing shaped you. I know, for example, that you've told the story about how your biological father died when you were very young and how that changed everything for you and your family. Tell us about that experience and whether it built any resilience in you as a result.
It was a pivotal moment in my life. It was, with hindsight, I think of my 10-year-old self then. It's something that changes the way that you look at life, the way you live your life, the way you relate to people, your aspirations, your dreams, who you want to be as an individual. I know my father was close to all the siblings, but I always say he was closest to me. That's a claim, and dead men don't talk, so we have to live with that claim. I'm a middle child. I have 3 older siblings and then 2 younger ones, but I was the youngest girl. So, and our family was quite close. My father was a very strong clan man. He liked to have his family around him. He liked for us to know kwa Kwamufuma, as he used to say, where you come from. You have to know the roots. You can't just be the leaves of the tree. You have to know the roots from which you come. But at the same time, we were also very, very close. The 6 children and my two parents. And partly, I think, because my father was a very strict man. He didn't want us running around in the area where we lived. So we did have certain standards that were very much Vanava Major. Not Major as in title, but M-E-J-A. That was his first name. And so when somebody dies in a car accident, when somebody dies who is just the keeper of the house. If I talk about the tree analogy, he was the trunk and the roots. He represented strength. He represented who we are. He gave us pride. He reprimanded, but he built you at the same time. He gave you dreams. My mother was obviously his partner in that, but then to all intents and purposes, in the academic way that we describe today, my mother was uneducated. And so she didn't speak English. So my father played a very critical role. And losing him in a car accident, and you're a 10-year-old, and you don't really understand when you're told, you just don't understand. So you start to then digest it on your own. And everybody else is going through pain, so there isn't psychological assistance the way we know it today. And so you kind of have to become your own psychologist and therapist, mentally, emotionally, even physically. And I think for me, I call it a pivotal moment because with subconsciously, I should say, I said to myself then, I will never be dependent on another individual ever again in my life. I will never lean on somebody ever again in my life. I will love you and I will leave you. But I will be my own tree trunk. I will be on my own roots. I will be the definer of who I become. But what was important in that decision is that I also always wanted to be the girl that my father would have been proud of had he lived. And that drives me to this day. What would he say today if he saw me, what I do, saw this interview? And I hope he would say, yes, I brought a decent human being into this world, and I'm proud.
I love that. I think he'd be proud of you too.
Thank you.
So you've just talked about the impact of your father's death on your family. After he died, your siblings were taken in by different siblings of your parents.
That's right.
And you were taken in by your paternal uncle, Mr. Dolika Banda, who ultimately became the 4th Republican president of Zambia. Can you tell us what it was like living in the family of a prominent politician?
You saw the big smile on my face when you mentioned his name. Primarily for us, he was not a prominent politician. He was a father. He was a loving and caring father. The politician was him. And we all understood that that was his life, and we just had to fit into it. But primarily, particularly when you come into a home after what had just happened, you lose your father, and then you walk into this house. They were already close anyway, and I was quite close to both he and his wife, even before my father died. But when you walk into a home and you feel the love, you feel the acceptance, you feel the welcome, you feel the embrace. My aunt always said, she was Bemba, she's also late, but she always said, Munomchalo, takufuyira okwekala omwana nanguomo ulechula. So you must embrace a child. And that's the life we had. So the husband was like that and the wife was like that. So for me, it was almost as if I had been plucked from one cohesive situation, but I had also landed in an equally cohesive situation. Their boys to this day call me their sister. So it was a very fortunate landing, if I can put it that way. The turbulence was there whilst we were in the air, but once we landed, the tarmac was smooth and we went into the terminal and then we went off to do whatever we needed to do. So when I say I was carted off to boarding school in England at 10, I went to boarding school because their children went to boarding school in England. And so they didn't say, you go to boarding school in Zambia. We were all carted off to boarding school in England. And so growing up in that family, you learned the gift of giving with your full heart and the gift of receiving with your full heart. Some people are very reluctant to receive something. I mean, no, it's okay. What you're taking away from that person is the joy of giving. So receive. If somebody gives you something, receive it with full heart. So the gift of giving, the gift of receiving, the gift of living. The gift of living. In that house, in our family today, I have brothers who are Lozi, I have cousins and sisters who are Bemba. We all speak rubbish versions of each of those languages. You have people who are not biological family members but have become our sisters as we were growing. That was now the politician in him. Mm-hmm. He will arrive at lunchtime, just before you set the table, and say, oh, now I went. And you look, and they are 12 people that he has brought from Parliament. Mm. What do? You tell him, no, there's not enough food. He says, whatever is there, we will share. Mm. We will share. So this is how we were brought up. He was a politician, and I say this not because he was my father, but I have seen many politicians. And I think he was a politician who was a person before the politician. He cared about people, genuinely. I mean, my story is the story of so many. It's the story of so many. So there were many lessons: living, giving, receiving, and loving. And resilience. We learned a lot of resilience. You can imagine being in a political hole. Mm. He landed himself in trouble quite a few times. And so we would have to sort of deal with it. We'd have to deal with it. I remember my aunt crying at one point, Videke Nikiana, why can't you just let it go? He said, and if I let it go, then what? And then who? So yes, we learned a lot growing up in that house.
So clearly he became a second father to you in all respects. Mm. Looking from the outside in, we always saw him as a very jovial man. Yeah. And that was the nature of him, probably both behind the scenes and on the public stage. And speaking of the public stage, what would you say to people who attack politicians in a very personal manner, being from a family of somebody who was on the political stage? Mm.
That's a difficult one. And it's a difficult one because a politician belongs to the public, right? Mm-hmm. You might think he belongs to you, he's your father, and he shouldn't be criticized. He had even as a father, he had his shortcomings. So I'm not painting a picture that he was absolutely glorious. But we would criticize him in a different way. We would criticize him out of love. Mm. There's a difference when somebody tries to criticize or discipline you out of love than when they do it out of anger, resentment, small-mindedness, fear. I think a lot of public criticism of public figures comes from a position of fear. What you don't know. And you're afraid of that person, and you have no other way to bring them down other than to talk about who they are dating, how many children they have, that kind of thing. I say that generally. And I feel as though if I have one thing to say to anybody who's listening to this, but particularly to my Zambian people, we must continue to criticize, to critique, I would say, mm-hmm. how our public figures present themselves. what they do, how they do it. That we must do. It is action, it is citizenry, it is a responsibility for us to be able to question and challenge our leaders on what they do. But do it on the basis of, you said GDP was going to be 4%. It is now 2.5. Why? And what are you going to do about it? You said you would build 15 clinics here, and you've only built 3. Why? And what are you going to do about it? You said the price of gas was going to be, or petrol, was going to be whatever it is. It is much higher than that. Why? What are you going to do about it? That is constructive criticism, and it will help our country to move to the next level. It doesn't change the price of milli-meal. It does not change the price of petrol. It does not change the price of school fees. If I ask the president today how many children he has, it does not change my life at all. So why are you expending that energy on something that brings you absolutely nothing? So public criticism, I think if you're in the public space, you have to expect. And I can't stop people from doing that. But try to do it in a manner that builds our country, rather than what's the right word? Destroys our representation at the high level. They represent us, right? And now you have social media. So whatever we ask on social media, whatever useless questions we put on social media, the whole world reads them. And they'll say, oh, the Zambian president, the Zambian minister of finance, or the Zambian whatever, is like this. So it is our responsibility as citizenry to be constructive in what we do and look for answers to problems, solutions to problems. Leave the personality. Leave the personality. And our political dialogue has become the same. When people go to start campaigning, too often, they're attacking each other personally, instead of telling us what they're going to do about this country. This country has needed help for the last 30, 40 years. I'm not talking about the current administration. So Linda, the question you asked me is very important, and I've answered you from a sort of respecting the public person perspective. But if the world was a kinder place, I would ask from a personal perspective of people who criticize people in public office, whether it is a female or a male, to remember that if it is a female, she's a mother to someone. She's a grandmother to someone. She's an aunt and a sister to someone. If it's a male, he's a father to someone, grandfather to someone. And so when we put this stuff out there, if we can be a little bit kind and remember that there are people who get so hurt when you read these things in the public space. And you look at the person about whom it is being stated, and you know that that person is hurting, but because of the role that they play in life, they're a mother, they're a pillar, they're a father, they cannot express that hurt. Maybe they cry at night, we don't know. Maybe they ask, why did I do this? And why did I have to put my children through this? We don't know. So if there's a shred of kindness when we put this stuff out on social media, let us remember that it is a person that we're talking about.
So we've talked a bit about your second father, Dolika Banda, and his political life. How did his life as a politician affect your attitude towards public service in your own life, if at all?
It did indirectly, in the sense that other than becoming chair of ZCCM, which is a state-owned enterprise, I have not really worked in the public sector. My whole life has been private sector, and a lot of it developing finance. But even in doing that, there was always an underlying desire to do something for people, to uplift people, and to do something for Zambia. Which is why, even before retirement, I just decided at 50, I need to be back home. I need to be on African soil, and I need to be able to do something for Zambia. given all the exposure that I had had. It's a privilege, right? I think I've lived a really privileged life. It came out of adversity, but I think I have lived a really privileged life, and therefore I feel it is my responsibility to uplift someone else the way that I was uplifted, to fire start somebody's ambition in the way that mine was fire started, to mentor, to grow people, to allow our young people. You know, I look at Zambia today and I think too many of our young people want to leave this country. They think this country is not worth living in. It's hard, and it is. I say they think, but that is the reality that we are all living. It is hard to live in Zambia today. And again, I'm not saying it is at this particular point in time. I'm just saying this is the trend in which we are going. And so, for the love of this country, everything that I do, everywhere that I go, I try to be an ambassador for Zambia, a good ambassador for Zambia. Number one, so that people know about this country. People know that there is good that comes out of this country. Number two, so that this generation, I'm looking at them all that are filming us today, Linda. I don't want them to leave this country. I don't want them to leave this country. I want to see more of these so that next time we're being filmed by another one and another one. And then they can do the equivalent of the ZAFTA Awards, I suppose is what it would be called, the Zambia arts and fashion and trade, whatever. I want it to happen in my country. Influence that you speak about from RB, let's call him RB here. He always said, Chalo chino ni chano. This is your country. You must never allow yourself to be in a situation where he encouraged us actually. If you want to live in England, that's fine. If you want to live in the US, that's fine. If you want to live in France, that's fine, which are the countries that I lived in, went to school in. But he said, don't forget where you're coming from. Italian Americans call themselves Italian Americans. African Americans still call themselves African Americans. Irish Americans, German American, French American. What are you going to call yourself? American. Originally from Zambia. It doesn't work like that. So that desire to be back home was always there. I'm very rooted in my soil. People ask me, where do you live? And I tell them, I live in South Africa, but my home is in Zambia, because this country is where I feel complete. And you cannot be in this country without caring about what the public sector is doing to serve its people. A term that I use very often these days is, Zambia is so wealthy, this country is so rich, but Zambians are so poor. Where did we get it wrong? How is it that people can come from all over the world, rich countries, poor countries, conflict countries, stable countries, and live in this country better than our own people? That dialogue for me is public service. Just asking that question. I don't have to work in government. I don't have to be in a ministry. I don't have to be the mayor of Lusaka. I would love to be, by the way. There's a lot of cleaning up that needs to happen in this city. But you don't have to be in those public offices to be able to be a citizen. And being a citizen means being of public service. So yes, I do scholarships, I do mentoring, I do programs like this, which is advocacy, for us to be proud of who we are. Zambians must be proud of who we are and where we come from. And it should not be okay that when you're driving through the streets, it's only Zambian black children that you're seeing at night, drunk, no work, no school, no clothes. If this country belongs to anybody, we should be seeing also